Hi guys, this is Victor Yerrid. I am the puppeteer and voice of Hup the Podling in the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance from the Jim Henson Company. And today I'm going to be reading to you from Shadows of the Dark Crystal by my good pal Joe Lee. This is the first in a 4-part series that Joe wrote. This one was actually part of a fan fiction competition that he won and then went on to write the other 4 books. Joe wrote on our TV series for Netflix, as well as created the entire language of Podling. So he is a hero of mine, and I'm super happy to be reading from his book. I'm going to be starting in the middle of chapter 10. So this book is all from the point of view of Naya the Drenchin. So at this point, Naya she found out at the beginning of the book that her brother Gurjin was on trial for treason against the Skeksis and had fled. So she is on this journey to Harar to stand trial in his place. And so when we catch up with her here, she is just leaving the Sprighton village where she has seen Kylan, but she has not yet met Kylan. Okay, here we go. Naya's ears perked at the sound of Gelfling voices, calling to one another in the early morning. Up ahead, she saw a second cleared area in the field where the grass had been rolled flat. Several target posts had been driven into the earth there, each painted with different colored stripes. 4 Sprighton Gelfling were standing about, 3 with rope and rock bola in hand. The 4th was standoffish, eventually dragged closer by one of the boys. Naya stopped to watch one of the girls hold the bola by the handle weight, a fist-sized rock at one end. She swung it over her head so the 2 counterweights, one at the middle and one at the far end, whipped around in a quickening circle. Finally, she let out a yip and released it. The rocks cartwheeled through the air and snapped around a distant target, the counterweights tying the rope in knots and securing it midway up the post. The girl cheered and gave a little jump of victory. 2 of her companions cheered with her, though the 4th was not so enthusiastic. Squinting, Naya recognized Kylan the songteller as the last, stiff like a stalk of grass as a bola was shoved into his arms, pushed up to the toe line from which he was to swing. The others chided and hooted at him, and from the way he held it in his hand, at the wrong spot with the wrong hand, Naya could tell bola swinging was not one of his gifts. Reluctant but jeered into it by his companions, Kylan twirled the weapon. When he let it loose, it was at the wrong time, before the counterweights had fully reached their peak. The bola went crashing into the earth, blowing up a chunk of dirt before falling to a pitiful rest not 10 paces away. His companions exploded with laughter. Naya shook her head and re-shouldered her pack, looking ahead to the mountains. She had a long way to go, with no time to waste teaching Sprighton youth how to swing a bola. She'd had a bola in hand since she was a child. One of her first toys, her father had often joked, was a tiny bola made of floating wood and vine. Kylan the songteller had plenty of his own people to teach him. The Gelfling voices drew her attention again as the curved road brought her abreast of their target field. The 3 Sprighton had gathered around Kylan, and though Naya couldn't make out all the words, she could hear their tone nudge from teasing to mean-spirited. Kylan went to retrieve his bola, but it was so sharply embedded in the earth that he had to use both hands to release it. Even then, when it came free, the recoil sent him stumbling backward, nearly losing his footing and eliciting another round of laughter from his companions. Naya watched for a moment more until the oldest of the group, a boy with long braids bound with red and purple smeemy feathers, reached out to shove the chagrined songteller. "Hey!" Naya shouted, interrupting the boy before his hands could make contact. "Don't you think he's had enough?" "Mind your own business, Drenchin," the boy called back, but he turned to face her. While he had his side turned, Kylan snatched up his bag and made a quiet escape toward the road ahead. When the boy with the braids finally noticed, he hissed and shook his head. To Naya, he repeated, "Mind your own business, and go back to the bog you crawled out of." That got a good response from his friends, though Naya wasn't impressed. She waited until Kylan had gained some distance before taking one of her own bola from her pack. From the road, she was twice the distance from the post that the Sprighton's were. Swinging with a well-practiced arm and grounded stance, she brought it to full circle in only 2 orbits, then let loose on the 3rd. The rope and rock sailed through the air with perfect precision, latching snugly onto the highest colored band on the center pole. "That's what they teach us in the bog," Naya shouted, grabbing her ears in her fists and sticking out her tongue. Speechless, the Sprighton only looked back and forth, between her and the tightly knotted bola at the top of the post. Neech, who had launched eagerly from her shoulder the moment she'd thrown the weapon, perched on the post in short order, taking the counterweight in his mouth and skillfully unwinding it. From the high vantage, he easily glided back to her with the bola dangling from his jaws like a pendulum. By the time he dropped it in Naya's open hands, he was chirping with little pants. She smiled and kissed him when he settled on her shoulder. He wasn't quite big enough to do his job tirelessly yet, but his effort had paid off in front of the Sprighton, who gaped as if they'd seen two suns collide. Contented, Naya put her nose in the air and carried on down the trail, confident she'd have no more trouble from their lot. Up ahead, where his path through the field met the road, Kylan was leaning with hands on knees. When he heard Naya's footsteps, he straightened, brushing his braids over his shoulder and taking in a big, deliberate breath. "Thank you for your help," he said with a trained formality. Naya noted that the woven pack strapped to his back was full, and not with bola or whatever else a song-teller might take on a normal daily excursion. He had on traveling shoes as well, the same kind as she, but with less beadwork and more stitching. His gaze lingered at her shoulder. "Is that a muskie? I've heard of the flying eels of Sog. I've never seen one before. Many thanks to you too, little one." "You could have helped yourself if you'd fought back," she said, letting Nietzsche's sudden self-contented preening speak for itself. "Those kinds are all talk. Give them a little fight back, just once, and they'll leave you alone forever." Kylan looked warily down the road from where they'd come. Then he straightened his vest, paying it more mind than it required. "I'm not good at fight back," he said. "I know I'll have to learn to be on my journey." "Journey?" Naya nodded to his pack. "Where I come from, I think we'd call it running away." "I'm not," he exclaimed, but the outburst was sudden with guilt. Naya chuckled. "Good luck to you, song-teller. Don't let others pick on you like that anymore. A rock's good for one of two things, throwing or hiding under. Pick whichever you want, but the more quickly you decide, the better." She waved a goodbye and headed down the path, leaving the chagrined song-teller behind. The cleared ground was easy to walk on, flattened and free of sticker plant-filled grass. She wondered if it would go all the way to the mountains, if only she could be so lucky. The sky was clear, perfect weather for a long day's journey, and she heard footsteps behind her. Kylan, though a few strides back, was nevertheless on the same path, heading in the same direction at more or less the same speed. They walked at a constant distance for some time until his eyes on her shoulders became so distracting that she slowed her pace enough for him to walk side by side. He smiled, and she didn't smile back, unsure whether she wanted to become attached to a song-teller on a journey like the one she was on. "Where are you headed then?" Kylan asked. "Harar, at the coast of the Silver Sea," she replied. Hoping he'd take it as a warning, she added, "It's a long way, through wilderness." "Ah," Kylan said, "north to the misty peaks, through the darkened woods we creep, along the blackened river deep. If I remember right, Stone in the Wood is along the way, isn't it? That's where I'm going." Naya shrugged in agreement. She knew from her dream fast with Thra that Stone in the Wood was the halfway point between Sog and Harar. "Would you mind if I joined you?" The question was so polite that Naya very nearly agreed on principle, but she imagined any number of dangers they might encounter on the way. In her mind, each scenario was made more dangerous when she pictured protecting a Sprighton song-teller who couldn't throw a bola to save his life. "Well, I'm not sure," she began. She tasted soft talk forming on her tongue, and before the flavor could overwhelm her, she stopped and turned so they were facing each other. It wasn't fair to either of them, really, and she knew better than to try to sweeten the inevitable. "Listen, song-teller, I need to reach Harar as soon as possible with a message for the Almadra. I don't know how long it will take me, but I don't have time to waste." He held up his hands. "You don't have to take care of me. I promise. You can't even throw a bola." Again, his ears folded, and he curled his lips in. A flush of guilt hit her cheeks, but she stood her ground. It was the truth, anyway. "Well, maybe not, but I can be useful in other ways," he said. "At the very least, I promise I won't slow you down. I may not be good at hunting, but I'm a good cook, and I tell a good song." "Songs won't help on the journey I'm on," Naya said. Although it was true, her belly rumbled a little, as if whispering to her in protest. Kylan caught the bit of hesitation and insisted, "I can record our journey in exchange for your protection from Ruffnaw and Fizzgigs." Naya barked one accidental laugh at the thought, shutting her mouth quickly after, but it was too late. The smile was already on her face. She tried to lose it, but it haunted her lips. Firstly, she said, I don't need my journey recorded or songs during camp. Secondly, I would hope there isn't a gelfling alive who'd need protecting from a Fizzgig. But in Jaragen and the Maw of the King, the Fizzgig King eats Jaragen whole, Kylan said. If anything, he was determined, and he'd seen that smile. To escape the huge maw was no easy feat. Jaragen, yea, he tickled the king's throat with a leaf. It sounds stupid, Naya interrupted, but the smile was returning at the idea of a Fizzgig swallowing someone whole. What nonsense. Jaragen would have to be an awfully small hero indeed. But Kylan's words were strong, putting the ridiculous image in her head, a red and orange fluffy ball of fur, big enough for a gelfling hero to stand in. Before she knew it, she was almost laughing at the idea. Trying to hide her mirth, she turned away, hearing Kylan following. And when the king wouldn't burp for his part, Jaragen tickled backward, and King let out a big... Naya burst into laughter, unable to contain it. The story wasn't even that funny, but she hadn't laughed since leaving home, and the feeling was so good, she didn't want it to end. It was like a friendly fire growing stronger with every round. She knuckled the laughing tears from the corners of her eyes, chuckled some more, and kept walking. This time, Kylan didn't follow, seeming as if he'd finally gotten the message. He stood there quiet and solemn, holding the straps of his pack and looking forlornly after her. Just when he was about to disappear on the trail behind her, she stopped and turned back with a little sigh. Well, song-teller, she cried, we're still a long way off. We don't have time to stand around like sticks in mud. His head popped up, ears pointing to her, and she saw a grin grow on his face. He quickened his long-legged gait to meet her, and then, elbow to elbow, they were off into the rolling golden hills. All right, guys, I hope you read the rest of Shadows of the Dark Crystal, and stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.